Only mode.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a second. Just wanted to let you know ahead of time that this webinar is going to be recorded. So for anyone that either needs to leave early or wants to come back to the information later, or if you want to share this information with someone in your world that you think would benefit from it, the recording will be on our website. Excuse me. So with that, Michelle, if you want to start recording, we'll get going.
Yep, we're all set. We've been recording.
Perfect. Okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm Samantha Watson. I'm the Executive Director of the SAM Fund for Young Adult Survivors of Cancer, and Michelle, whose voice you just heard, is our Program Director. And we are so thrilled to be presenting this webinar today with Monica Bryant from Triage Cancer, who I will talk about in just a couple minutes. To give you a little quick background on the SAM Fund, in case this is your first time joining us for anything, we're based in Boston. We're a nationwide organization that is dedicated to helping young adults recover financially from cancer. So when all is said and done and the dust settles and you find yourself in financial ruin, as really all of us have in some form, SAM Fund's here to help you get back on your feet. And our biggest program is a grants program. We award financial assistance once a year for a whole range of things. There's a lot more information on our website, but we provide direct financial assistance to young adults who are just struggling in cancer's aftermath. So that's our biggest program. We also have a webinar series called Moving Forward with Your Financial Health. This is one of the webinars in that series, as well as the kickoff to one of our new programs, which I'll talk about. And our website, as you see on your screen, is thesamfund.org. So check it out if you have a minute. There's a lot of information and resources on there, and we hope that you find them helpful. So as I mentioned just before, we are kicking off a new program, and this webinar is the first in a series. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new program itself because we're actually doing it in partnership with Triage Cancer. But first I want to introduce Monica. We're so happy to have her back with us because she is pretty fantastic. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Triage Cancer. She's an attorney, a speaker, and an author. And she's dedicated to improving access to and availability of quality information on healthcare-related issues. And really, who in the cancer community, and specifically the young adult cancer community, has not dealt with healthcare-related issues? So she's really our go-to source. We trust her. She's very knowledgeable, and we're thrilled to have her. Monica has been all over the country providing educational seminars, and she's written articles and blogs and made appearances on various media outlets discussing healthcare-related legal issues. She's also an adjunct law professor at the John Marshall School of Law in Chicago. She teaches a class on cancer rights. And as I mentioned, we are really excited to be partnering with Triage Cancer for this new program, which we just kicked off a couple weeks ago. It's called Finances 101, a toolkit for young adults with cancer. This is the first webinar under this new program, but if you go to our blog, which is just thesamfund.org/blog, you'll see the first few posts that we did as part of this program. They're Q&As. First two were about health insurance issues, and we had one about medical bills, and we plan to grow it out from here. So check it out and share it. It's our goal through this program, and certainly through this webinar, that young adults who are at any stage of the cancer journey and are in the position of needing to make financial decisions will be as informed as possible and will make the best decisions that you can make so that recovering financially from cancer does not become a lifelong process. So stay tuned. We have a lot more topics in the pipeline. We are so excited to be partnering with Monica and Triage Cancer. And I'm going to turn it over to Monica in just a second, but first I'm going to just do a quick plug to beg you to, all of today's participants, as well as anyone that's listening after the fact, to please fill out the follow-up survey. You'll see a link on the screen as soon as it's done. We really value your feedback, especially with this being the kickoff of a new program. We really want your feedback and your opinions on how we can make this as helpful and as relevant to you as possible. So I promise it will only take a minute or two. It's all online, and if you could do that, we would be very, very grateful. So with that, Monica, I turn it over to you. Thank you so much for doing this webinar with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Give me just one second to switch over. All right, so hopefully everyone can actually see my slides now. Yeah. So I'm so delighted to be working with the SAM Fund and to be here today to talk a little bit about smart shopping and tips on how to pick the best health insurance, because it can be really complicated to figure out all of your different options and sort of the things to think about as you're shopping for health insurance. So I think that most of us have probably been in a situation where we felt like this. And so this is a gentleman who's talking to his health insurance company, and his health insurance company is saying, "I'm sorry, sir, but the stress caused by trying to figure out your health insurance is not, in fact, covered by it." So hopefully today we will get some information so that this becomes a little bit easier to everybody. And in order to do that, we're going to start off with some common terms to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And these are really important for you to actually not just sort of recognize the word, but to understand what they really mean for you so that you can effectively shop for health insurance. So it's very similar to if you're out shopping for a car or for a television, there's specific terms that are used when talking about those kinds of things that makes you a better consumer once you understand them. It's the same concept here. So the first term is going to be your premium. Now this is going to be something that you pay every single month just to have health insurance. So even if you never go to the doctor or pick up a prescription or access any sort of health care, you're still going to pay this premium every single month. Now, there are also some costs that you're going to have when you actually use your health insurance. And so the first is your deductible. And this is going to be an amount that you have to pay out of pocket each year before your health insurance company starts picking up their share of what they're supposed to pay for. And the deductible is really going to vary plan by plan. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to go through some examples to help make this a little bit more clear. But the deductible is an important piece for you to look at. The next thing is the copayment. And so this is something that you pay each time you get care. And again, this is going to vary plan to plan. So some plans might have a $50 copayment, some plans might not have a copayment at all. But usually when you pay this, it's when you walk into the doctor's office before they even let you see the doctor, you're going to hand over $25, let's say. Or each time you pick up your prescription drug, you're going to pay a copayment. And then the third cost is your cost share or your coinsurance. And so those are two phrases that really talk about the same thing. And this is the difference between what your health insurance company is responsible for paying for your healthcare costs and what you're responsible for. So let's say you have a plan that is a 70-30 plan. What that means is that once you hit your deductible, you're going to be responsible for paying 30% of your healthcare costs, and the health insurance policy is responsible for paying 70% of your costs. So that's your cost share. Now, when we talk about out-of-pocket maximums, what we're talking about is your deductible plus any co-payments you have to make plus your co-insurance, so the portion that you're responsible for paying. So it's going to be all of your costs for covered services except that monthly premium. A couple more things to talk about before we get into the nitty-gritty. There are a couple of different ways that people get health insurance. So for example, individual insurance. And this can be a little bit confusing for some people because we call it individual insurance, but you can purchase individual insurance that in fact covers your entire family. So the word individual is really just trying to differentiate it from group and government sponsored, which we'll get to in a minute. There's a couple places that you can get individual insurance now. So we're going to talk about the marketplaces that are available now through the Affordable Care Act. And then also, you can just go into the open market and purchase directly from a health insurance company like Aetna or Humana. The second place that people get health insurance, and in this country where a vast majority of people get their health insurance, is through group insurance. So this is like getting insurance through your job or perhaps through a group plan through your union. Now there are two different kinds of group insurance: funded and self-funded. So when most of us think about an employer-sponsored plan, we think about a plan where the employer is responsible for paying part of your premium and you pay part of the premium, and that money goes to a health insurance company, and the health insurance company then gives you health insurance. So that's a funded plan, pretty straightforward. A self-funded plan, on the other hand, is where your employer pays directly for your health care costs. Now, generally, the employers that have self-funded plans are going to be very large employers, so police departments or companies with tens of thousands of employees might be a self-funded plan. The thing that gets a little tricky when you're thinking about a self-funded plan is a lot of times the employer will contract with a third-party administrator to administer the plans. And in my mind, I think about this entity as being the one who handles the paperwork and writes the checks and kind of does all of the back-end stuff. Why it can be confusing is a lot of times that third-party administrator is an insurance company. So you might have an insurance card that has a Blue Cross Blue Shield logo on it, and it looks like every insurance card you've ever had in the past, but it might say something in small little letters on the back to the effect of, this company is not responsible for this person's health care costs, or this company is just an administrator of the plan. And that's supposed to tip you off that you have a self-funded plan. Now, it's not to say that one is necessarily better or worse than the other, but it is important for you to know what kind of plan you have, because different rules may apply to you differently depending on whether or not you have a self-funded plan. Also, sometimes these plans are referred to as insured or self-insured. It's the same thing, it's just two different words for it. Now, finally, what I want to mention about group insurance is some group health insurance plans may be considered grandfathered. And those are going to be plans that were in existence prior to March 23rd, 2010, and haven't made substantial changes since. And we're going to talk in a little bit about the Affordable Care Act and where grandfathered plans matter. But again, it's really important for you to know if your plan is grandfathered, just like it's important for you to know if it's self-funded, because different rules may apply to you differently if it is. And if you're unsure about either of these things, I would definitely recommend contacting whoever handles employee benefits, maybe your HR department, to ask these questions. And you can also probably call the number on your health insurance card as well to ask these questions. Now, the third way that people get health insurance in this country is through government-sponsored insurance. And there are only two government-sponsored insurance policies, Medicaid and Medicare. And we'll talk a little bit more about them later on. Now, within all of these different options, so individual, group, and sometimes even the government plans, there are different types of policies that you might be eligible for. So one type of policy is called a health maintenance organization, or an HMO. Now, these are going to be policies where they have a smaller network of providers that you can access, and generally what they're going to require is that you have a primary care physician, and that's going to be your starting off point almost always. So even if you need to go see a specialist, like an orthopedic surgeon, you would start off at your primary care physician, have an appointment with them, and then get a referral to that surgeon. Now, the benefits to sort of having this HMO smaller network going through a primary care physician is that generally you're going to pay less for HMOs. So you're going to have lower premiums, copays, and deductibles generally. The next type of plan is called a preferred provider organization, or a PPO. Now, these are going to be policies where there's a larger network of providers, oftentimes over multiple hospital groups even. So you have more choice in who your doctors are going to be. And generally, with PPOs, it's not necessary to start with a primary care physician to get to that surgeon. You can go straight to the surgeon. The downside to PPOs generally is that they're going to be more expensive, so you're going to pay a little bit more for having more choice. And then the third type of plan that I want to talk about is called a point of service plan. And this is really a combination of the two types of plans, the HMO and the PPO. So for example, it might be a situation where, like an HMO, you have to designate a primary care physician who will then make referrals to specialists. But then like a PPO plan, you can go outside of that, and if you do go outside of that, you'll just end up paying a little bit more than you would have. Now, I get asked all the time, what's better, an HMO, a PPO, a POS? And there's no straight answer. There's no one-size-fits-all. So for some people who live next to the only hospital in the area, and that's where all their doctors are going to be, even if they're talking about seeing a specialist, and all of those doctors within the hospital are also within the HMO network, an HMO might be a fantastic option for them. But if you live in a city, let's say like Chicago, where you might have the option between 5 hospitals within 10 miles of your house, and you want to see specialists in each hospital, a PPO might be better for you. So really, this is one of those areas where there isn't a one-answer-fits-all situation, but it's more about figuring out what your needs are, and again, where we have to be good consumers and figure out what's available in these plans. So when we're talking about plans, the other thing that we have to think about is, even if we decide, okay, we want an HMO and we want this health insurance company, but there's 3 plans offered to me, what are going to be the differences within those plans? The networks of doctors and hospitals. I think it's very important, especially if somebody is in the middle of treatment or in follow-up care, and you want to have some continuity of care and make sure you can go see your doctors. It's really critical to make sure that your doctors are covered by whatever plan you're choosing so that you're getting the most amount of coverage possible. It's also really important to look at your copayments, because it might seem really affordable until you figure out, well, wait a minute, there's a $50 copayment every time I see the doctor. That can add up really quickly. And then finally, you're going to want to look at prescription drug coverage. So are any of the drugs that you're currently taking or that you might take in the future covered? And if they are covered, are they covered at an amount that you feel comfortable with? Because some policies have different tiers of coverage. So it might be covered, but it might only be covered at 20%. And if you have a really expensive cancer drug, that might put you in a really poor financial situation in the long run. And then finally, some plans have a separate deductible just for prescriptions. And that can be tricky for people because they might think that they've met their deductible, but then they're still being charged quite a bit for their prescription drugs, and generally that's because there's a separate drug deductible that they haven't met yet. Okay, so all of that was sort of to set the stage and make sure that we were all on the same page. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as healthcare reform, Obamacare. We're going to talk about it as the ACA, or the Affordable Care Act. Now, I'm sure that most of you have at least heard something about the ACA, but one of the reasons that we're still really focused on talking about the ACA is because there's been studies done recently that show that the people that can benefit the most from it don't know about it. So in fact, it was something like 90% of uninsured Americans who could get insurance through the ACA don't even know that open enrollment is starting. So even if this is old hat for you and you've heard us talk about the ACA 100 times, I definitely urge you to sort of spread the news and spread the resources to those around you as well. So even though today is mostly focused on purchasing insurance, I did just want to really quickly quickly go through some of the other consumer protections and benefits that we have now because of the ACA. So, for example, insurance companies used to put limits on the amount that they would pay out for certain benefits. And once you hit that limit, that's it, they would just stop paying. And that's actually where we saw a lot of young adults get into situations where they had tens of thousands of dollars of medical debt, even though they had insurance, because they hit that limit and they still needed health care. So thankfully, the ACA said no more limits on essential health benefits, which are 10 categories of things that insurance companies through the ACA now have to cover. So things like emergency care and hospitalization and mental health, etc. Also, insurance companies can't just cancel somebody's policy because of a mistake. They have to show that someone either didn't pay their premiums or they lied about something really, really important in order to cancel a policy. One of the most exciting things in my mind that the ACA did was it said that as of January 1st of this year, insurance companies can no longer deny selling somebody a policy just because they have a pre-existing condition, like a cancer diagnosis. And not only can they not deny somebody a policy, they can't charge them more because they have a pre-existing condition. And the reason is something called premium rating is now only based on 4 things. So are you buying an individual policy or a family policy? Your age, so generally the older you get, the more expensive it gets, but there's even limits on that. Your geographic location, so each state has specific geographic locations that they can base your premium on. And finally, in most states, they can look at tobacco use. So if you use tobacco, you can be charged more. So these 2 things together are really significant, especially in the cancer community, because it shows that relatively affordable insurance is now accessible even once you've been diagnosed. Also, there are some new benefits for all of us. So most health insurance policies now have to cover certain preventative services for free. So if you need a certain screening or immunization, you can get that for free without having to meet your deductible or pay a copay. Now there's an asterisk because this doesn't apply if you have one of those grandfathered plans I was talking about. So this is just one example of where having a grandfathered plan will matter to you. Information that is being presented to you when you're shopping for insurance now has to all be given to you in a standardized format. I'm sure many of you have heard about the provision where young adults can now stay on their parents' plan until they're 26. And thanks to this one provision, we've seen over 3 million young adults in this country now have coverage that didn't before. So that's a really brief overview of some of the protections and benefits. But as Sam mentioned earlier, we've done a couple blog posts about health insurance that go into more detail about these things and have some links to more information if you're interested. Now, I mentioned that all of the health insurance policies have to present you with information in a standardized format. And what you see on your screen right now is an example of that. And so no matter where you get your insurance from in terms of Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna, the plan should be presented to you in this format. And the reason that this is so important is that because it now allows consumers to literally look at 2 policies from 2 different companies and compare them across the board. So what are the kinds of things that you should be looking at when you get something like this? You're going to want to look at your overall deductible. And generally what you're going to see is an individual deductible and a family deductible. And then you're going to also see what the out-of-pocket limit is. So this one is $1,500 for an individual and $3,000 for a family. And so this is, again, remember the most that you're going to pay out of pocket for your covered services. And so the hope is that these out-of-pocket limits are going to eliminate situations, or at least vastly reduced situations, where people are left holding the bill, you know, the $10,000 bill for whatever service they got. And then finally, all of these summary of benefits and coverage will have a section down at the bottom where it shows you that there's a phone number or a website that you can call to get more information about this specific plan. Now, as you can see, this is just page 1 of the 8-page document. So if you were to turn the page, you'd see something like this. And this is where it gets into the specifics about what the plan is going to offer. Now, you're not going to get every piece of information that you need in this 8-page document, but it's at least a starting off point for you to narrow down your choices. So this is showing us, it's talking about prescription drugs in this top sort of section. And I wanted to point out that there's 2 columns. So there's going to be your cost if you use somebody in network, and then they're going to show you your cost if you use somebody out of network. And as you can see, it's a pretty significant difference if you go out of network, which is why it's so critical before you pick a plan to try to make sure it's covering as many healthcare professionals that you're seeing as possible. When they're presenting your costs to you, it can be presented in 2 different ways. So first, they can show it to you in a dollar amount. So for this particular plan, if the person gets a generic drug, all they are responsible for is a $10 copay if they go to a retail location. So a retail location is going to be like Walgreens or Target. The other way that the information can be presented to you is in a percentage of your co-insurance. So here, if this person has outpatient surgery, they're going to be responsible for 10% of that cost. So those are the 2 different ways, a dollar amount or a percentage of what you'd be responsible for. Okay, so there are a couple of new health insurance options available to individuals thanks to the Affordable Care Act. The first is Medicaid. So most people are surprised to learn that in many states, just having a low income wasn't enough to get you access to Medicaid. You also had to fall into another category. So for example, you had to have a low income, low asset level, and have a disability, and be a pregnant woman. So that left a lot of people who just had low incomes without access to health insurance. So the ACA said, we'd like to create a new category of eligible individuals who have incomes at or below 138% of the federal poverty level. And so this chart just shows you what, in dollars, 138% of the federal poverty level actually is. But I know we have people from all over the country, so I'm just going to say the caveat that this dollar amount does not apply if you're in Hawaii or Alaska. You guys have a different federal poverty level. But for everybody else, this is what it is for this year. Now, this was supposed to happen nationwide, but the Supreme Court got their hands on the law, and with their decision in 2012, basically made expanding Medicaid voluntary for states. And so this is where we are right now. And this is probably the slide that changes most often, and we give this presentation a lot. And the reason is because things in the states change. So some states, it's up to the governor whether or not they're expanding. In some states, it's legislature, etc. So right now, we're in a situation where 27 states expanded, 22 have not, 2 plan on expanding for next year. I will say that with the results of the election last week, this may change. So again, I'm just really want to make the point that, well, this is where we are right now. This may change in the future. And if you live in a state that is not expanding and you feel very strongly that they should be, this is one of those opportunities for some legislative advocacy and engaging with your elected officials to let them know why expanding Medicaid is so important. Okay, so the next option I want to talk about isn't actually an option at all, but rather it's a new way for us to purchase health insurance. And what these are the state health insurance marketplaces. The best way to think about these marketplaces is to think about a health insurance shopping mall. So what you are purchasing when you go to these marketplaces is not a government plan, but rather it's a private plan sold by health insurance companies that are all probably pretty familiar to you, like Blue Cross or Humana or Cigna. But what the marketplaces have done is really created some quality control. So there's some regulations about what the plans have to cover in order to be sold in these marketplaces, and some standardization that we're going to talk about in a minute. So if you think about it this way, when you go to a mall and you buy a sweater from the Gap, you wouldn't turn around and say, I bought a mall sweater. You would say, I have a sweater from the Gap. Same concept here. So when somebody says I have an Obamacare plan, that can be a little bit confusing because there's no such thing really. What you have is a private plan from, let's say, Blue Cross that you purchased through the marketplace. So I hope that that sort of helps clear up any confusion that there may have been. Also, when these were created in the law, they were originally called exchanges. But people didn't really understand what an exchange was, and so thankfully they renamed it into a marketplace. But if you hear the word exchange, it's all the same thing. Now, in order to purchase in the marketplaces, you have to live in the United States, be a U.S. citizen, or lawfully present, like a green card holder, and you can't be incarcerated. Now, I mentioned that there's some standardization and some quality control involved in what's being sold in the marketplace. There may also be some financial assistance to purchase in the marketplaces. And there's two types of financial assistance. So the first is a premium tax credit. Now, this is going to be an amount that's going to lower what you are responsible for paying monthly for your premium. Now, these only apply if you're going to buy a plan through the marketplaces. The second type of financial assistance is a cost-sharing subsidy. And that's going to be an amount that lowers your cost share. So let's say your copay is $25 and your subsidy is $10. So when you go see the doctor, instead of paying the whole $25, you're only going to be responsible for paying $15 out of that. Now, these subsidies are only available if you buy a silver plan, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But the tax credits are available if you buy any of the 4 levels of plans. Now, all of this is based on family size and income level. And so this chart kind of tries to visually demonstrate everything we've talked about. So for individuals who have incomes at or below 138% of the federal poverty level, you'll be eligible for Medicaid if your state expands. For people who have incomes between 138 and 250% of the federal poverty level, you'll be eligible for a cost-sharing subsidy if you purchase a silver plan. If your income's between 138 and 400% of the federal poverty level, you'll be eligible for a premium tax credit. So we said that everything is based on your household size and your income level. So what exactly is your household? The people that you're going to include are going to be yourself, your spouse, any children that live with you, even if they work and earn enough to file their own tax returns, anyone that you include as a dependent on your tax returns, even if they don't live with you, and then anyone else under 21 that lives with you in your house and who you take care of, even if you don't technically claim them as a dependent. Now, you're only going to want to include an unmarried partner that you live with if you claim them as a dependent for your tax purposes and they're the parent of your child. If both of those things aren't true, you would not include an unmarried partner, even if they live with you. You also wouldn't include your unmarried partner's children, your parents if they live with you, if they file their own tax returns, any other relatives that live with you, if they file their own tax returns. So this is pretty specific, and when you go to healthcare.gov and you're going through the marketplace application, there are more instructions, but I think it's helpful to sort of get an idea about who is considered part of your household. Similarly, it's based on your household and your income level. So what's your income? For the purposes of the Affordable Care Act, the income that we are talking about is something called your modified adjusted gross income, or your MAGI. Now, I know that this chart is very hard to read, and I didn't put it up here so that you could kind of read through it, but it's from the Labor Center at Berkeley, and I've included the link here if you want to go see the whole thing. But I did just kind of want to give you an idea that it's not as simple as what's in your paycheck, that there's some more things that you have to take into consideration. When you're thinking about your income, you're going to be projecting your 2015 income now. And so when you're doing that, try to be as accurate as possible, because if you end up underestimating how much you make, and therefore you get more of a tax credit or a subsidy than you were entitled to, you might actually end up having to pay it back at the end of the year. And so for most people, that's a lot harder to deal with than just getting a slightly smaller amount each month. Now, if the idea of going through this and figuring all of this out and doing the math for yourself makes your head hurt, as it does mine, the good news is there are multiple calculators out there online that you can just kind of go into, and it will guide you through the process of what to put in and do the math for you. One example of these calculators is the Kaiser Family Foundation, whose website is just kff.org. And then also, if you go to healthcare.gov, it walks you through the steps as well. Okay. So we've talked about the fact that what's being sold in these marketplaces, there's some quality control, and it's still private insurance plans. One of the ways that the marketplaces try to make shopping for insurance a little bit easier is by standardizing the cost share of what's being sold. So remember, the cost share is how much your health plan pays and how much you're responsible for of your healthcare costs. And these levels are based on the precious metals. So the bronze plans are the lowest level, and those are going to be plans that cover 60% of your healthcare costs once you meet the deductible, and you're responsible for 40% of your healthcare costs. Silver is 70-30, gold is 80-20, all the way up to platinum, which is 90-10. So platinum plans will cover 90% of your healthcare costs. You're responsible for 10%. Generally, bronze plans are going to be the cheapest monthly premiums, but they're going to have the highest deductibles and out-of-pocket costs. Whereas platinum plans are going to be the most expensive monthly and are going to have the lowest deductibles and out-of-pocket costs. Some platinum plans have a $0 deductible, which means that they start picking up 90% right away. So The idea behind this is you can make some decisions as a consumer right off the bat. So let's say, for example, you are in the middle of treatment that is incredibly expensive, and you know you need a health policy, a health care plan that's going to cover as much as possible. So you could say to yourself, I only want to look at gold and platinum plans and find one there that covers my doctors. And so by just doing that, you've eliminated having to sort through all the bronze and silver plans. In addition, these marketplace plans have to be presented to you in that format I showed you with the blue columns, and they all have to meet those minimum essential health benefits. So the idea is that if you're buying a plan through the marketplaces, you know you're getting a plan that has been vetted to at least be of a certain quality. Now, each state did a little something different with their marketplaces. So some states created their own marketplace. Some states partnered with the federal government to create a marketplace. And some states are just having the federal government run their own marketplace. Now, when you look at this, the differences, there's a couple of differences, but really the main difference is going to be where you go to access the marketplace. Because remember, even plans that are being run by the federal marketplace are not selling you a federal policy. They're still selling you private policies from within that state. It's just that the federal government is the webmaster, so to speak. So if you're in Ohio, you're not getting a federal policy. You're still getting Ohio-based policies, but it's just that you go to healthcare.gov to get there. I will also say that this is likely going to change for 2015 and beyond. Some states are going to move to healthcare.gov. Some states will create state marketplaces, etc. So this, again, is going to change a little bit moving forward. Now, I get lots of questions about individuals who have insurance through their employer, but they don't feel like their employer's policy is really covering what they need it to. Can they go into the marketplace and buy insurance? And the answer is absolutely. So we always have the option to opt out of our employer-sponsored health insurance and buy it somewhere else. The tricky thing is, in most instances, if you are eligible for insurance through your employer, you're not going to be eligible for financial assistance in the marketplace. So again, you can buy the policy in the marketplace, but you might not get financial assistance. The only time that's not true when you could be eligible for financial assistance in the marketplace is if the policy that your employer offers is considered to be either unaffordable or inadequate. So what unaffordable means is that it costs more than 9.5% of the employee's income. And inadequate means that the policy covers less than 60% of your healthcare costs. So I hope that makes you think about a bronze plan, right? It has to at least be a bronze plan. If either one of these things are true, then you can opt out of your employer-sponsored policy, buy in the marketplace, and get financial assistance. So I have the habit of talking a lot about these marketplaces as being an online entity, and they are very much an online entity like Amazon. But if anyone doesn't feel comfortable or is having trouble with the online system, there are a couple of ways that you can actually access this. So you can call a toll-free hotline where a live person will talk you through your different options. You can get a paper application and mail and fax it in. And then there are also what's called in-person assisters in all the states designed, who are trained to help you get through the application process and even help you narrow down what might be good choices for you. And if you're looking for an in-person assister, you can go to localhelp.healthcare.gov and type in your zip code and find someone near you. Now, open enrollment for these marketplaces has been closed for 2014, but is about to open, which is part of the reason why we scheduled this webinar right now. So it starts November 15th and goes all the way through February 15th. I will also say that for most employer-sponsored plans, open enrollment is right around this time too. Now, the earliest that a policy will start through the marketplaces is going to be January 1st. And if you need your coverage to start January 1st, you have to pick a plan and apply for it before or on December 15th. If you had a plan in 2014, the federal government has just come out and said that they will automatically re-enroll people in the same plan for next year. But I definitely caution against just letting that happen, even if you're really happy with your plan. Because this is all about being a smart shopper and a good consumer. Plans are being added to the marketplaces all the time. So I definitely recommend, even if you loved your plan from last year, go back into your marketplace and take a look and see if there's anything that might be better for you being offered now. It's also important to make sure that your financial information is as up-to-date as possible. So maybe you took last year off for treatment or recovery, but then this year you're going back to work. Make sure you go back in and put in your new financial information so that you don't end up in a situation where you're having to pay back a ton of money at the end of the year. Now, open enrollment is not important for Medicaid because Medicaid applications are accepted year-round. Now, we all know that life does not happen within these 3 months of open enrollment, and that it might be that you have coverage now, but maybe you don't know if you're going to still have coverage in March. The good news is that there's a special enrollment period provision within these marketplaces. So if you end up having a life-changing event outside of open enrollment period, so outside of that 3-month period, you can go into the marketplace and apply for a special enrollment period, and then you have 60 days to enroll in a marketplace plan. So by life-changing event, we mean things like, losing your job, even if it's voluntary. So even if you voluntarily decide to stop working to focus on your, recovery and treatment, that would trigger one of these special enrollment periods. Or if you've gotten married, or you've moved states, or you're military returning from active duty, all of these things are going to be things that are going to trigger a special enrollment period in the marketplaces. Now, I'm going to go through a marketplace example, and I recognize that not everybody on the call is going to be looking for insurance through the marketplaces, so to speak. But the things that I'm about to talk about are pretty relevant whether you get your insurance through your employer or you're shopping on the marketplace. So just keep that in mind. Now, when someone goes to the marketplace, you can go right now and kind of get basic information. You won't be able to get specific details about each of the plans for another couple of days. But generally what you're going to do is put in some information about your household size, your income level, and they might ask you some other questions about your health status. So are you pregnant, or do you have diabetes? Don't be too thrown by those questions, because what the marketplace has done this year is they've added those questions not to make any sort of determination about if they're going to sell you policies, but because some of the policies have sort of been called out as being better for particular diagnoses. So maybe one has really great coverage for diabetes or for cancer. So don't be too alarmed if you see questions like that. And then once you put that information, you'll get something that looks kind of like this. And the information here that you can get, what's kind of really important from this screen, is to recognize that there are a couple of different insurance companies that you're going to be able to choose from in most cases. So this person lives in Illinois, and they have 5 different health insurance companies to choose from. And of those 5 companies, there's 56 different health plans being sold. Also from here, you can see if you'd be eligible for any sort of tax credit for the premiums. Now, if you scroll down, you're going to see information like this. And so here I've pulled out a bronze plan, a gold plan, and a platinum plan. And what, again, you can see just as sort of from this snapshot is your monthly premiums, your deductibles, and then your out-of-pocket maximums. And what can be really tricky for people when they're shopping for insurance is to sort of get past that monthly premium amount. So at first glance, you might see this information and think to yourself, wow, the bronze plan is actually the most affordable plan out there because it's only $208 a month compared with the platinum plan that's more than double that. But when you're really looking at what these policies are going to cost you, you have to also figure out the out-of-pocket or look at the out-of-pocket maximum. Because when you do that, what you end up finding is that oftentimes what you first think is affordable isn't. So what I recommend that you do when you've narrowed down your options is to take the monthly premium, multiply it by 12, because that'll give you how much you're going to pay for the year, and then add in that out-of-pocket maximum. And so here is the math for you. So when you start to look at the true costs, you can see that the platinum plan, even though you're paying much more monthly, ends up being the most affordable for the year because of how low the out-of-pocket maximum is. So again, this is going to be relevant when you're looking at employer plans or when you're looking at marketplace plans to really try to figure out what your actual costs are going to be. And this is especially important for people who are still in active treatment or who are still in a situation where they're having lots of follow-up appointments, because chances are you're going to hit that out-of-pocket maximum. Okay, now if you keep scrolling down, let's say you've decided, okay, I think I need this platinum plan, even though it's going to kind of hurt more monthly, it ends up being less expensive, and it's going to likely cover a lot more than the bronze plan would cover. You can click on the little details button, and you get this kind of information. And what's really important here is that now in the marketplaces, you can see the provider directory and the list of covered drugs. And that's true in all of the states that are being run by the federal government. It's true in some of the states being run by the state governments. So again, what's great about this is that you can actually look at the provider directory to make sure your doctors are covered. But I would also caution to not totally rely on what's online. So if you see that your doctor is covered under a plan, I would go that one extra step and actually call your doctor and double check that they're planning on accepting this plan for the next year. And you can look at your prescription drugs. So to sum it all up, for individuals who don't have health insurance through their employer, through Medicare or Medicaid, if they have incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty level, they'll be eligible for Medicaid if their state expands. For people between 138 and 400% of the federal poverty level, they'll be eligible to shop in the marketplaces and likely to get some sort of financial assistance. And then for folks who have incomes over 400% of the federal poverty level, they can buy in the marketplace and get all of the added benefits like standardization, cost share, and all of that I've talked about. Now, I realize that I've given you a ton of information in a short period of time, and I do want to take questions, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about some extra resources that you can go to. So Triage Cancer is my organization, and we have a plethora of online resources and an educational blog that I definitely recommend you take a look at. We try our best to put up sort of late-breaking news about the Affordable Care Act. There are also 2 other webinars specifically on the Affordable Care Act. So we're doing one in conjunction with Cancer and Careers tomorrow. So if you haven't gotten enough of me today, you can come check that out for free tomorrow. And Triage Cancer is doing one on the 24th. After open enrollment has started, because we're hoping that with that week or those 10 days, we will see how everything is working out with open enrollment and hopefully have some additional tips and tricks to navigate the marketplaces if needed. And then these slides are going to be available on the SAMFund website with the recording of this webinar, and so I've included some additional resources as well. And I definitely encourage you to engage with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Monica. That was a great presentation, and I think relevant to so many people. There's so much confusion around, the Affordable Care Act and, how it uniquely affects the young adult community. So this presentation was phenomenal, as always. So thank you. And we do have a couple questions. We're going to do our best to get to all of them. If we don't get to all of them, you can certainly follow up with us by email. We'll put you in contact with Monica, or you can visit the Triage Cancer site because the answers to your questions may be there. So I'm going to do my best to combine a couple of questions. And so to those people who ask these questions, if I'm not totally getting to the heart of your question, I apologize, and just, shoot us a note. But we had a couple questions come in regarding Medicaid and kind of how it interacts with all of this. And so one of the questions that came in, let me just find it so I can give it to you directly. So the question was about whether Medicaid covers different private hospitals. So if you go, for example, to a hospital in New York and you go to a hospital in Texas, and then you also have your local hospital, which is somewhere else, how does that play in? Is it a better idea to kind of shop the marketplace and try and find a different plan? I mean, what's your thought on that?
So it's going to completely depend on the state that you live in, because although Medicaid is a federal program, it's federally funded in part, but it's actually run by the states. So each state's program is a little bit different, and so I can't answer blanketly. But what I will say is, if you are eligible for Medicaid, you're not going to be eligible to get financial assistance to buy in the marketplace. So that's the tricky thing, is that they don't want you to sort of double dip in that sense. And so if you can afford the premiums in the marketplace without any sort of financial assistance, and you're adamant about going to multiple hospitals across state lines, it might be better to get a marketplace plan. But not a lot of people are in that situation.
Got it. Okay, and then we also had a couple questions that just came in now about that whole 138% versus 400%, et cetera, of the federal poverty level. And so somebody had a question about whether and how much of a tax benefit there is for each level of income. Another question came in, and you don't want to throw a lot at you at one time, but I think maybe we can combine it here. If you're making more than 400% of the poverty income level, should you shop in the private market, in the marketplace for a plan? Okay. We had a couple other questions also about the differences between plans that you have access to in the marketplace and employer-based plans or other private plans, but I think there's some question about actually the slide that you are on right now.
Okay, so basically the amount of subsidy you're going to get or tax credit will go down the more you make. So it is tiered based on where you fall into this level. And if you're not quite sure where you fall, what I recommend is going to healthcare.gov and playing around with it a little bit. So I actually had a woman who had her full-time job but then also did some freelance work on the side. And what we figured out is that the freelance work that she did ended up putting her income over the point where she could get financial assistance, but it didn't make up for the amount of financial assistance she would get. So she could then make the decision that for this next year, she's not going to do any freelance work because it made more sense for her to have the lower income but get more of a more financial help within the marketplace. So what's great about the way that healthcare.gov does it now is that you can actually go in, you don't have to actually put in your name or your social security number. You can play around with the numbers a little bit to see if there are decisions you can make in your life that benefit you one way or the other. So that was the first question, and I actually can't remember the second part of the question. Sorry.
I both actually had to do with that income level. There was also one, actually the participant who asked it has left the presentation, so I just want to get first to a question that just came in from someone who's still here.
Sure.
And that's a question regarding the requirement to live in the U.S. in order to qualify for using the marketplace.
Yes.
In her specific situation, she's traveling a little bit longer times, maybe 3 or 6 months abroad, and has a permanent address here in the U.S., but wouldn't be working, so she's going to need insurance.
So it would depend on how long you end up being in the United States, but generally what we've been told is if you spend a majority of the year within the United States, you're going to be deemed to have been living in the U.S. So really that provision is for like expats who spend almost the full year outside of the country and only maybe come back in once a year for immigration status reasons. That's sort of the rationale behind that. So if you're not sure and you're traveling or whatnot, I would definitely recommend contacting an in-person assister and go through the specifics of what your plans are for the year to make sure that you'd be eligible.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll get to one last one here, and then I know we're just about a minute over, so we'll end the presentation. But if your questions weren't answered, or if you have questions after the fact, then we'll have our contact info on the last slide. You can certainly reach out to us at any time. So the last one is about the difference between plans in the marketplace versus ones that you have access to through employers. Specifically, the question is from somebody who's covered by COBRA through a former employer, which, as we know, is exorbitantly expensive. But this person is afraid of not having the best coverage if they go through another plan. So they're wondering if it's worth the time to shop around and try and find a plan at the marketplace, or basically continue paying out the nose for a COBRA plan.
So again, I mean, I can't answer is it worth it, because that's a really sort of subjective term. But what I would say is, if you have the time and the energy and the emotional stamina to shop for insurance, it's a really great idea, because you might end up finding that in the marketplace there's a plan that's comparable or maybe even better than what you're getting through COBRA, and you might be eligible for financial assistance to get that plan. So, there's kind of this misconception that your COBRA option is always the best option coverage-wise, and that's not necessarily the truth. There are some incredibly good health insurance policies being sold on these marketplaces. So, and what I would say is make sure you do it now, because unfortunately, once you elect COBRA, you have to actually exhaust your COBRA before you would be eligible for a special enrollment period. So if you're in the middle of COBRA right now, the good news is, because open enrollment period is starting, you could shop for a new plan in open enrollment period, get your new plan, and drop COBRA no problem. But if you wait until open enrollment is over and you've kept your COBRA, you're going to have to wait out your whole 18 or 36 months.
Excellent. Well, you just covered a whole lot of ground, Monica. Thank you so much for being part of the webinar today and for all of this information.
My pleasure.
And on behalf of the SAM Fund, I know we're all so excited to be officially kicking off this new program with this particular topic, because it's one that touches so many young adults in our community. And so we're just very excited to have this be the start of this program, and this has been a great presentation. So thank you, Monica. For everyone that's listening now, you'll see on your screen that we have a couple of links for you. One in the middle of your screen is the one that I mentioned at the beginning. Please, please, please take a minute to fill out the post-webinar survey. It probably will not take you more than a minute, but we want your feedback on the presentation, on ways to improve the program, whether you like the program and have any ideas for future topics. Any feedback that you're able to give us, we really value highly. So please take a minute to do that. And also, as we said in the beginning, and as Monica just mentioned a little while ago, the recording of this webinar will be on our website, which is thesamfund.org/webinar, as well as on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/samfundtv. And we'll be posting the slides as well, because we know there was so much information that was just covered, and most of you were probably furiously scribbling down notes, but you'll have access to the slides probably within the next couple days. And as always, please feel free to share with anyone that you think, regardless of age, regardless of diagnosis, regardless of where in the country they are, if you think this would be helpful to them, then please share it far and wide. So thank you so much for giving us an hour of your day, and I hope you found this as helpful as we did. Monica, thank you again so much for doing this. Have a great day, everybody.